yes, I'm going to actually stick with the whole pricing discussion at the moment because we've got three
Cool.
questions here that are broadly similar. We'll start with the one from the infamous Alan from the Discord. Hi team, with the announcement of the 5 Pro, Sony has fired the starting pistol on 10th gen. Seeing the 5 Pro specs, what do you think the PS where do you think the PS6 will be? I'm thinking PS6 announced Q4 2026 to be released in 2027! Exclamation point.
Wow.
That's pretty close. CPU, GPU, Zen 4 and AMD RDNA 3 custom SoC. I think it's going to be RDNA 4 at minimum. Because that's what PS5 Pro is. RAM 32 gigs of GDDR6 SSD. PS5's weird 825 gigabyte. I think that'll be at least a gig.
32 gigs seems like a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're spitballing. Dedicated AI machine learning SSD slot, digital only, no controller. Uses existing DualSense. That's not going to happen.
Oh.
600 to 650 pounds. I think this is let's do the next question. Pseudo natural. Hello, custodians of the digital! Exclamation point. Before the announcement of PS5 Pro, I was ready to trade in my still fresh PS5 Amateur Slim and get a pisser machine.
Yeah, get that pisser machine.
Yeah, after that dreadful 9-minute train wreck of a presentation, I decided to save up for a PS6 instead. But I wonder, is Sony testing the waters for increasing PS6 MSRP? Do you think that 10th gen consoles could easily break $600 and €700? Thanks for your wonderful work! Exclamation point. Not so much a question, more of an observation. From Leftist Hominid. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Mark Cerny the Wise? I thought not. It's not a story the PC gamers tell you. It's a Sony legend. Mark Cerny was lead architect of the PS5. So powerful and so wise, he could design bespoke hardware to improve console image scaling. He had such a knowledge of the gaming hardware that he could even prevent gamers from having to choose between resolution and performance. The PS5 Pro's bespoke hardware is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. Mark Cerny's PS5 Pro became so powerful, the only thing Cerny was afraid of was making a console too expensive, which eventually, of course, he did.
He did.
This is only going to make sense to people who've seen Revenge of the Sith. Everybody else is going to be sitting there wondering what on earth is going on there. But I think this is kind of like it's a pricing thing. And, let's consider, first of all, Alan's point. We've got now a marker laid down in the ground for the kind of machine that Sony could deliver in 2024. And it's expensive. And historically, we've never seen consoles sort of reduce in price. Well, I guess we've got PS3 as an outlier there. Is this a marker that's being laid down in the ground that's saying, well, if you're going to want your console next gen, it's going to be quite a lot pricier? And what do you think of that, Oliver?
I think that I would expect more than one PS6 is my guess. Because I think that you cannot hit a mainstream price point anymore with a true generational leap. You can do a generational leap for a reasonable price, but not both. So I see this spec sheet and I think, there could be a room for a console like this. But I mean, I don't know. It just seems tough to me. Like when you're talking about a console that could cost $700, $800. In Canada, it's 960 Canadian dollars, almost $1,000, almost quadruple digits even for the price. I think that that's not a price that the market is going to be willing to bear for most people. I think they're going to want to have an entry-level console. I think maybe Microsoft was a little bit ahead of the curve with the series designs. And I think that probably you could have a console like this and that people would be interested in it. But you also need a console to sell to someone who is just wanting to play those games, wanting to get a good experience, but it isn't necessarily wanting to get the latest and greatest graphics technologies and the most advanced visuals at the highest frame rates. They just want something that they can play the games on.
Interesting. So Series S was just a generation ahead of its time then.
Possibly.
You're suggesting exactly the same concept, which I find to be intriguing. Alex, thoughts?
Wow.
I mean, looking at Alan's potential spec sheet here, it's basically going to be the case that there's a lot of things here that are just, well, what can I say, that we're possibly projecting too early because I think there's a good few years left before we do have the new hardware. We don't really know what that new hardware will be based on the AMD parts bin that's going to be available at that point. But I think, from my perspective, the games industry can't continue to ramp up on technology because it is going to reach the point where we're pricing out the mainstream audience that consoles are designed for in the first place, right?
Right. And that's why I actually do think the PS5 Pro is indicative of PS6 pricing to a certain degree, because they experienced with what Microsoft warned us about the whole, making a mid-gen refresh machine is going to make it more expensive and not be able to tier our price down, essentially. That ended up happening really intensely. That's why the sticker shock is there. And I don't want to comment so much on these specs here, but I do think Oliver's idea of maybe the 2 tiers is interesting. Maybe not a separate PS6 like junior, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's just that there is some fluid generation there where the PS5 is like much cheaper by that point to manufacture. Maybe. That they just keep cross-gen forever. Like the next PS6 games are all just also going to target PS5 or something like that. Something along those lines where they just keep up both,
So
both
essentially
generations at the same time.
the phone
sell
model,
it.
really.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure like you can get old iPhones from manufacturer. Can you still get the old iPhone from Apple?
Yeah.
Like the non-latest version? Yeah, well, maybe it's just like that then, I guess. Or, like with Intel, Rich, you were just talking about a 12400F. They're still selling those things, even though they are not the latest generation and the latest, part of the stack of the generation as well, too. That's already been replaced technically. But you still get 12400Fs out there. It's cool. I like that, actually. But it shows that the rate of progress is different as well, because that would not, like if you did that in the 90s, that thing would suck, So it's very different. I think really it's going to be more expensive, and there's going to be some sort of fluid generation there in terms of what's the base model.
Interesting. What's my take on this? Yeah, I think the games industry needs to have a bit of a think about where it's heading, because, ultimately more performance now means more cost. So do we need more performance, or do we need to be thinking about what it is that we want from gaming that can be achieved with similar performance to what we have today, but maybe with more innovative features? Machine learning is going to open up a lot of opportunities. So it kind of makes sense to double down on that. And I guess that's kind of what's happening with PSSR in the Pro. The thing that kind of slightly underwhelms me is that, they've put a lot of investment into a machine learning block, and they've essentially produced an upscaler, which is kind of like essential, I think, at this point. But I was expecting to see more. If you go back to the Sony demos of yore, it was all about experimentation, testing new things. Machine learning can do much more than upscaling. Obviously, we've seen frame generation added by NVIDIA. There's going to be new stuff coming from NVIDIA, I'm sure, for next generation Blackwell cards. And, I'd like to have seen Sony have their own take on what machine learning can do, because I think that's probably part of the key to actually making an affordable machine. The question is whether people really want more power. I mean, Nintendo Switch has been incredibly successful this generation, and that's certainly not anything to do with power. If we think about the success of the Wii, I mean, it's not my favorite machine, but it was essentially, dare I say it, an overclocked GameCube. That it was just it was a gaming concept driven machine. So I think there's a lot of chin stroking and head scratching about what the next generation 10th gen is actually going to be. We know what Microsoft thinks it's going to be. It's going to be a handheld that's also somehow scalable to the biggest generational leap of all time. And I've got to see what that is. But, what we're seeing here is proof positive that the biggest generational leap of all time must surely come with a pretty hefty price point. So, what's going to happen there? I just don't know.